And I'm actually a convert. I did not like cats for many, many, many years until I adopted this beautiful big Maine Coon at a former girlfriend's behest. We got this cat. I fell madly. Can read their face. We think, oh, she's clearly angry at me. And she says, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it, but I just got some really bad news about someone else entirely. If you can see down the road as you're driving, you'll see everybody chose it. Most people chose a different car or a different color. Uh, Experiences and love. The car itself isn't going to bring us happiness unless we truly love driving that car and it never loses its.
Hi, I'm Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth, and it gives me a great pleasure to introduce to you one of our sponsors today, Thais Gibson from the Personal Development School. Now, your personal attachment style is one of the most powerful forces in your life. It shapes your relationship, your self-worth, and your beliefs. What if you had the power to become securely attached? You'd be able to build stronger connections and heal any relationship. Attachment expert Thais Gibson from the Personal Development School has pioneered a transformative, practical approach that will change your relationships forever. The first step, discovering your own attachment style. The free attachment style quiz at the Personal Development School. You can take it in less than 5 minutes and you'll get a personalized report with insights about your patterns, your beliefs, and the next steps to make real change. Don't miss out. Check the show notes below for the link and start your journey today. Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining us from San Jose, California, I was just reminded because I said San Mateo, is Dr. Adam Dorsay. And the book is called Super Psyched, 4 Types of Connection. Good day to you.
Good day to you, Greg. Glad to be with you.
Well, I'm glad to have you. And I do want to let our listeners know we're going to take a deep dive today into things that are affecting people on a worldwide basis these days. And one of those big things is loneliness. And I want you to stay tuned because Adam has something very important to let you know. And so let me do a little brief introduction of you here. Adam is a renowned psychologist. If you look out there, you'll see a TEDx talk that he's done. He's the host of a popular podcast called Super Psyched, and that's Psyched. Check that on Spotify or Apple or any of those favorite places. You can also reach him at his personal website. That's adamdorsay.com.
Actually, my apologies. It's actually dradamdorsay.com. It's with the DR. I just knew that there's no adamdorsay.com website. Sorry.
Oh, there isn't. Okay. So what is the website for you that you want to send them to?
Sure. It's DRADAMDORSAY.
Okay. All right. We'll make sure that we get that right. That was my bad.
Not a problem, bud.
And his work really focuses on people navigating life challenges with resilience, self-awareness, and emotional intelligence. In this episode, we'll explore the themes of Super Psyched, as I said, and how Adam's expertise helps individuals unlock their potential and live more meaningful lives. From managing stress to fostering deeper connections, Adam's insights are practical, they're engaging, deeply impactful. So I just want everybody to get ready. We're going to have a heck of a show here today. So welcome to the show and thanks for being on and spending this time with our listeners at Inside Personal Growth. So Adam, I emphasized in the little talk in the beginning, the importance of connection. You emphasize it in the book, The 4 Types of Connection, and live the life that you love with that. Can you describe connection as you describe connection as everything. But can you explain what this means in a world where many are feeling lonelier, not connected, and challenged by making connections?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, Greg. It's such an important topic, and it's the topic of the book I absolutely had to write. I've started 4 books. I've only finished 1 because this is the book I really wanted to write all along. After conducting about 20,000 hours of psychotherapy and interviewing hundreds of people on my podcast and reading tons of books, the word connection just keeps coming up. The problem is it's a nebulous term. What does connection actually mean? And is it only how we connect with each other? It turns out, at least according to my best detective abilities, there are 4 ways we connect, and it starts with ourselves. It's not a selfish thing to connect with ourselves. It is the connection from which all other connections emerge. If we are not connecting well with ourselves, it's like we're walking through life with a whole bunch of rocks in our shoe, or like we constantly have to go pee or something. And we're not going to be able to connect well with others if we're not just really connected with who we are authentically, knowing who we are. From there, it kind of ripples outwards like concentric circles, how we connect with others. It could include how I connect with my wife or anybody with their significant other, but could include children, could include how I'm connecting with you. You are an other. And there are these 2 realities between us. There's your reality.
You consider connecting on Zoom connecting?
I absolutely do.
Because
Nope.
frequently I find it challenging, having done so many shows, and I love meeting people in person, right? Because you can pick up the vibration, the sensitivity of the person, just like you. Obviously, you meet with your clients online. Maybe you meet with them in person, but I do find the technology to be wonderful, yet at times for it itself to be lonely.
Can be. And yet I do feel your presence here. And maybe it's different for you. It could be in your subjective reality that this is no connection at all. And I'd have to honor that. I think for many of us, there's a hierarchy of connection. I think the lowest grade would go with text. I think a little bit above that might be a written letter. A little bit above that would be an email. Above that would be speaking on the phone. I can hear people's nonverbal. I was just talking to one of my best friends on the phone. I could hear his excitement over the phone. I could hear the nonverbal stuff. I could feel his energy, and I can feel that even with somebody I don't know very well. And I would say Zoom would be above phone because I can see your face and I can see if you're engaged or not. And I'm able to see, is there something actually going on here?
Well, I'm glad you gave me that, Adam, because there are times when I do this, I do feel connected, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's a depth of connection. It's a way I want to sense and feel. Now, you highlight connections, as you just said, self, others, the world, and something greater, right? And it's always for me, because I have a master's in spiritual psychology. What is the something greater?
Something greater. Oh, sorry. I thought you were asking.
So what I was going to ask you is, which of these, meaning those 4, do people struggle with most and why? And I'm going to take a stab and guess at that it is the something greater.
I'm going to say that that's a valid response. And I would say that if we polled 100 people, we might get 4 very different answers.
Yeah.
And I think it depends on the stage of one's life. I think there are times in one's life, almost like if you've read Siddhartha, where you go through these phases, these developmental changes. Erickson talks about these stages of development. And sometimes for children, they're not really thinking all that much about the something greater. They may be thinking about themselves. They may be thinking about their classmates when they're in high school. It may be connection with others. And I think that connection to self in high school is stifled because we're trying to conform and get along and going along to get along. And at some points in our lives, we may really be connecting with work. Work is the connecting with the world, or the person who tries to find themselves while traveling in Southeast Asia. It's almost, it's something that we see a lot of people doing. They're connecting with the world, and they're connecting with themselves, and they're connecting with others, and they're also probably connecting with something greater, visiting various places of worship and trying to ask themselves, yeah, what does it
But
all mean?
Kitty is connecting with you right
Have my
here in the same.
So one of my she just jumped on my lap and she just let me know, hey, I want to hang out with you and Greg.
And I'll tell you, it's wonderful to have pets to connect with. I think from the loneliness epidemic, pets are probably one of the greatest ways that we could make a connection with. As you see, I can see her little face right there.
She's really fun.
It's unconditional love.
And entirely. And I'm actually a convert. I did not like cats for many, many, many years until I adopted this beautiful big Maine Coon at a former girlfriend's behest. We got this cat. I fell madly in love with the cat. The cat fell in love with me. I retained custody after we broke up, and I've been definitely a switch hitter, a dog and cat person ever since. I never thought I would have any interest in cats whatsoever.
Well, in that last question, I did say with something greater, because I think the reason for me is our spiritual quest, our journey, our curiousness about what happens to us, maybe even in the afterlife. These kind of questions are deep, deep questions, and sometimes hard to come to some grips with and understand. Um, would would you, from your standpoint, you said that you called it autopilot and disconnection. Um, Many of us, me included, we go into autopilot on a daily basis. It's like that's the default. What are some of the steps to become more intentional about how we spend our time and how we spend our energy? Because you're counseling people on this all the time, because I'm just going to put a side note here. It's usually that auto connection that keeps us disconnected. That autopilot that keeps us disconnected.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Can be.
Yeah. When we go into autopilot, we frequently are disconnected.
Yeah, so the human brain has evolved for it to conserve energy and to use minimal resources and to keep us alive. So there are certain habits that we engage, like autopilot. When I wake up in the morning, I know my routine. I know what I'm about to do. And if I had to think it through each time very intentionally, that would be a real waste of energy. There are certain things that we don't want to have to think about intentionally every single time we do it. Right. You know that a red light means stop or yellow light means slow down. We don't want to have to think about, what does that mean? But when somebody beloved to me is giving me a facial expression that says, oh, I need to be paying attention. I need to be really, really monitoring every word and the things that they're saying and the things they're not saying, what their body language is telling me. And oftentimes when we go into autopilot in those things, we can actually get into trouble. And we also have to think, how do I best respond? We have a drop-down menu in our mind. We could say something that's a zinger and could really inflame a situation, or we could say something that might be more inquisitive or curious or helpful. And being intentional is not the way the brain is designed. We actually have to kind of override the system defaults to go into those modes. And it's important to know when to be in autopilot, because there are times when we definitely should be there, and when to be super intentional. And when we get into trouble is when we kind of go into autopilot around big decisions like, who are we going to marry? What type of work would I like to do? How would I like to respond to this rather complex problem? Danny Kahneman out of Princeton described these as System 1 and System 2 problems. System 1 problems are the ones that we should be able to answer quickly, like what is 1 plus 1? And a System 2 problem is a more complex problem, like a problem that might be a bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much is the ball? And if you ask people that question, everyone will tell you the ball costs 10 cents, except that's wrong. We need to think it through. And upon thinking through it more, we realize, oh, wait, it's $1.05 and 5. And the problem that we can get into is that we might apply the system one thinking, the thinking fast thinking, to a problem that we should be thinking slowly on and really consider. What is it? So that's that. In terms of intentionality, I like thinking of it in terms of those two paths. Is this something I should be thinking fast on, or is this something I should be thinking more slowly,
Well, I
more
think
intentional?
I would say that it's probably also, when you say autopilot, it's an autopilot response to a loved one who frequently might show you that face or that expression that you mentioned a minute ago. And you have a standards pat kind of, "Hey, well, how are you feeling?" Or what is it that you need?" or whatever. And after a while, they get disconnected from that because they can almost realize the response you're going to give them because it's not very meaningful. What would you tell people to make that deeper, authentic connection with another person versus going to the autopilot connection, which, "Oh, I think you're upset," and then make them more upset when they say, "No, the hell, I'm not upset."
Well, we all you got it right, and we all know that the word assume is making an ass out of you and me, and yet we don't really act on that. We think we know our partners so well. We think we know them better than we actually do. We think we can read their minds. We can't. We are right less than 40% of the time when we try to read the other person's mind, even the person we've been living with for decades. There's hard research that indicates, yeah, we are wrong more often than we are right when we're trying to read the other person's mind. So there's this old idea of get curious, not furious. And if you think about furious, that actually occurs in a lower part of the brain. It occurs in our emotional center. It happens in the amygdala. Higher up, much in the penthouse suite, is this prefrontal cortex. And that is where curiosity occurs. And if we can engage curiosity and ask open-ended questions, you know, hey, just, hey, babe, how are you doing? When we think we can read their face, we think, oh, she's clearly angry at me. And she says, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe it, but I just got some really bad news about someone else entirely. And it has nothing to do with me. And the problem is we also have a default that many of us think, oh my gosh, it must be about me. And when we engage the curiosity, maybe we find out it is about me and it's something that I can actually solve, or something that might involve a deeper conversation. But being curious, asking those who, why, what, how, where, when types of questions, rather than the yes or no questions, the
Right.
yes or no answers. These open-ended questions can really, really make a big difference. There's a chasm between what we know and what we do.
Right.
We know we should do these things, and yet when it comes down to it and we're under stress and duress, oftentimes we haven't wired it into our system. And so what I would like to make automatic, if I could ask, is automating that form of intentionality, which sounds like a contrast. Like if you can learn to stress test yourself, run simulations, and allow yourself to get the right response under duress, because it is stressful when somebody walks in the room.
Well, look,
They have that face.
I'm sure you're aware of this of all people that, taking a deep breath and giving yourself an opportunity to stay in that space before responding to something. And look, people have heard that probably a million times. They do it? No, they literally then just go and react,
That's right.
and they end up getting the blunt end of the stick, so they
Yep.
say. But all of this also relates to, I'm just going to say, vulnerability and authenticity. But I'll say vulnerability too, Brene Brown. Many
Wonderful.
of us, many of us do not want to be that vulnerable. So connecting to ourselves requires that we are vulnerable and we're authentic to get to that level of authenticity. How can someone begin to uncover what you refer to and most authors refer to as true self amid what you explained in the book, all these societal pressures that we've got about being something different than we really are? I mean, I could say some weird things here, but the reality is like, hey, it's like, well, do you fart in public? Well, that's me. That's what I do. Right. So, it's like, okay, It's like that is not obviously that's kind of a weird example, but I say it just to accentuate how are we going to be our true selves versus having this influence from the outside world saying you need to be something other than what you are.
So we've all received some kind of mirroring throughout our lives. Uh, a well-intentioned parent might say to one child, "Oh, wow, you're such a good arguer. You'll be a great lawyer." And to the one who really cares about animals, "You'll be a great veterinarian." And they're intending to convey a blessing, but in some ways it could actually be a curse because the argumentative person might have no interest in doing that whatsoever, might not want to be the lawyer. And the person who loves animals might love animals, but have no interest in veterinary science. Similarly, we are told, we are mirrored by others who we are, and sometimes they're correct and sometimes they're not correct. And we even walk around with our imagination of how we're supposed to be. I was told I was supposed to be this by this authority, or this is what a true man does. A man does not ask for directions when he's driving. Instead, he takes 5 hours to get someplace. It could take 5 minutes because he's not willing to ask for directions. As Amos Tversky once said, we waste hours by not being willing to waste minutes. Oh, actually, he said it a little differently. We waste years by not being willing to waste hours. But we have these ideas of who we're supposed to be. And it took me a very long time for me to rid myself of my own versions of this. And that's what I see in my office all the time. And I will probably die still holding on to fragments and ideas that have nothing to do with reality or me. But I'd like to think that I've gotten rid of most of that lint from my clothing. Um, we also have this thing called an imaginary audience. When we're alone, we still even imagine how others would judge us as we're doing a thing, even when we're in private sometimes. So we have these social brains, and we are wired to be social because we come from tribes, and we would do anything it took to remain in the tribe, including, just stuffing down who we actually really are. Because if we didn't, we would be ostracized from this tribe and we would die. So that's
That
somewhere
sense of belonging, right? I mean,
sensible.
you see it in gangs, right?
You
It's
got
like
it.
people come together. It's that whole uh, homie boy, I'm in part of this gang kind of thing. So, look, uh, social media, take its good, take its bad. It certainly has had a major impact on creating much divisiveness, especially politically lately, as we've seen. And it's also created this me versus them attitude because we have a position or a stance. And what advice would you have for people right now that are like super connected to this? I mean, fortunately, we're post election. So hopefully some of this is waning right now and that we can get together in a civility and be civil with one another. But for the longest time, it wasn't. Who knows how much longer it's going to be if we can be civil. But what advice do you have for managing these spaces and what would you tell people who it's the againstness?
We are so much more alike than we believe ourselves to be. Some of my friends have vastly different political ideas than I do, and yet we care about the same things. The ideals are very similar, the values. We would show up for each other in times of need. And as Benjamin Franklin said, while our country was forming, he said, we must hang together or we shall all hang separately. And we all know united we stand, divided we fall. We do not, excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold here. Get to know the person. Daryl Davis, who is an African American musician, goes to KKK rallies and he actually befriends these members of groups who want to kill him. And as he shared with me on my podcast, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And I would say that to somebody who says, well, I hate you because you vote differently. Well, how can you hate me if you don't even know me? Well, Daryl Davis has gotten to know these people and asked them about their values and asked them, how do your values actually, how are they consistent with what you're doing? And they have in droves handed him their robes saying, I'm out. I'm done with the KKK. He has over 200 robes. Now, we don't have to go that extreme here. Somebody has a different bumper sticker on your car than yours. Um, you might find over a cup of coffee that they lost somebody dear to them and they went through the same type of grief and stress that you went through, and that they love their families and they're doing the best they can based on the information they have. And generally, they're just really responding to what their parents told them was right. I vote the same way my parents do. I wonder, Greg, is that a coincidence? I was raised a particular way. I see the world. I mean, certainly there are differences between me and my parents, but in many ways, we're very similar. And
Mm,
while there are many people who vote very differently from their parents, I would contend that most people are not that far from the tree in this way. And
right.
in some ways, when I'm having a beer with somebody who has a different idea than I do, we're basically saying, yeah, our parents voted differently. And so now we do. But look at this. We both love the same sports team. We both would do anything for our children. We both care very much about various causes and donate to them through time and treasure. So I'd say get to know the person and remove the label for a moment. Blue and red, whether it's political or gang affiliated, it doesn't matter. Um, get to know the person.
That's great advice. And I think ostracizing yourself from, I have recently had a gentleman on here that said he wanted to know what he quoted the other side thought. So he went to um, not a driving range, a gun place where you shoot guns, whatever it is. I don't know because
A
I don't
shooting
know what kind
range.
of shooting range, and so that he could interact with people that were quote kind of the NRA, and he realized after he was done shooting that there was more commonality than there was, dissimilarities in that. And I thought it was really quite interesting to choose a shooting range to go find the kind of people that you thought so much differently than you. So look, self compassion's a big deal. At times, I'm sure individuals out there all listening, including myself, uh, because of our ego or upbringing, have a hard time giving ourselves self compassion. But we know that's the only way we can heal. And if we're not healed, we can't help others. So, how does this self compassion help us foster these meaningful connections with both ourselves and others?
Love it. So, one of my favorite axioms is hurt people hurt people. So, self compassion is not self indulgent. It's if we want to get along well with others, we have to get along well with ourselves. That going back to those rocks in our shoe, if we are hurting, if we're walking around with rocks in our shoe, how well will we actually be able to be open to another person? We're going to be feeling those rocks in our shoes. Self compassion is such a powerful tool, and it gets such better results from who we are as people that even the Navy SEALs use it, and they found that the results are better and faster by using those. Chris Germer, who is one of the foremost researchers out of Harvard who talked about this on my podcast, said, you know, you would never imagine a whole bunch of badass Navy SEALs using these self compassion techniques. And what we want to do is talk to ourselves the way we talk to a friend. If we talk to our friends the way we talked, I'm sorry, if we talk to our friends, yeah, the way we talk to ourselves, we would have no friends. We have no problem. We actually think it's almost awesome to talk to ourselves and basically slap ourselves across the face. If I can't find my wallet and I ask myself, how could I be such an idiot? Now I've done that and I've asked myself that, and it doesn't help me get closer to my wallet. What does help is what I would say to a friend, dude, where did you see it last? Or who else can you ask? Or can you look at your calendar and see where you were for the last little bit? And maybe you'll be able to, do some postmortem trace. That's how I would talk to a friend. Self-compassion is based, that's one of the three roots to self-compassion. That's the easiest one to describe, is talk to yourself the way you would talk to a friend.
I like that one. It's like being in a movie theater and watching a movie and having the ability to sit there with popcorn and speak to the person next to them. Talk to them like, in other words, a true friend. I can share almost anything with you, right? In that context, whether we're talking about the movie or we're talking about anything else. And you said there's this connection formula. Um, how can one begin identifying with what truly fills what you call their connection needs, this connection formula that you refer to?
I love that you asked about that. So your formula and my formula may have certain aspects of commonality. You care about psychology, you studied it. I care about psychology. And yet you want the spiritual route and I want the clinical route. So there are some overlaps and there are some differences. My father could sit down and watch a Wagnerian opera that takes 6 hours. I would think that was, and he would love it. He would say that was amazing. And I would think that was a very expensive place to sleep. He could go through his entire life not touching a pet. And as you just saw, one of my pets jumped onto me during our interview. I can't go through a day without touch. So part of my connection formula, I have to be connected to pets. Just gotta.
Right.
And each of us, all 8 billion of Earth's inhabitants, have their unique connection formulas, the way they feel connected, the way they come alive, the way they feel a sense of vitality. And if you can see down the road, as you're driving, you'll see everybody chose it. Most people chose a different car or a different color. Uh, those were informed by their likes and dislikes and their connections and how they feel vital. If you go to the ice cream shop, you'll see somebody choose a flavor that you would never choose. That's how they feel alive. Those are their tastes. And it is our job not to respond to shoulds. I was told I shouldn't ever get into this because it's not interesting or it's not high culture. I shouldn't be into NASCAR racing. But I find out after going to a couple of these are awesome. And it is part of my connection formula. My father, who I just mentioned a moment ago, never thought he would be in F1. He just never could have imagined it. And yet he befriended somebody who's super into F1 and now they travel and go to F1 races and think it's awesome. And he's really into it. And one of the things that Will Schwalbe said on when I was interviewing him is every week he's a grown man with no children. He makes it a point once a week to do something he thinks won't be interesting at all. And much of the time he will find it to be incredibly interesting. So we can expand our sense or we can go deeper into what we're into, but no one can tell us, as long as we're not harming ourselves or others, what we should or shouldn't be into. We're into it because we're into it, and we know it because we feel it.
It's an interesting thing you speak about. I remember having Stephen Covey on here, or not
Oh, wow,
Stephen Covey,
cool.
Stephen Kotler, actually, Stephen Kotler. And we were speaking about flow genome project, that kind of stuff. And he said, if you really want to be curious, and that you were saying that curiosity is in the frontal lobe. And I said, yeah. He says, well, why don't you read something that you would normally never read?
It's
Right.
really
In
good.
other words, read a architectural digest. I would probably never think about reading an architectural digest, but he's saying that will actually bring up not only the level of curiosity, but it'll get you thinking about things in a way that you never thought you would think about them before. I thought that was a really good thing. Now
I think it's brilliant.
it is brilliant, and most of us, we default, because my show is on personal growth, wellness, business, and spirituality. It's like, man, those are the 4 genres that I got. But what about all the other genres that are out there that that you could really read? Now, your concept of tragic optimism. Okay. Wow, what a conundrum there. Um, how does embracing tragic optimism help individuals find meaning, especially when they're facing such adversity?
I wish I could claim that one. That comes from Viktor Frankl, and he earned it in the hardest of ways. He earned it over in the Auschwitz death camp when he was living there and he lost everything. But it means not just looking at like, hey, just turn that frown upside down and you'll be fine. It's noticing what sucks and being willing to deal with that and notice that other things are co-occurring. One of my friends last week said to me over dinner, he said, what else is true? That's a question that he asks himself when something's going very badly. He notices that and he owns it and he says, wow, this sucks. What else is true? Well, the sun is shining. What else is true? I am clothed and I'm warm. What else is true?
Hmm.
And I think that's a very important thing to be able to do.
You know what that reminds me of, Adam? Sorry to interrupt,
It,
but Byron Katie was on this show many moons ago. She hadn't been on a long time, but hers was always, if you remember, and I'm sure you know who she is.
yeah,
Is just her questions were all, is it true? Is it really true? You know, people would get up in front of the audience and say, "Oh, my husband's a jerk," da 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 da, and then she'd go, "Was that really true?" And then they think about it for a second and go, "Well, no, no, he's not that bad." Right? You know, and then she says, "Well, is that, you know," and then she'd go on with that series of questioning, just like you did around true. Is it really true? Because you live in a world of making stuff up, then you believe what you made up, and then you live in that world of what you made up. Right?
and it just becomes a story and it has nothing to do with actual reality.
Exactly. And I think that's where you're talking about here. And now, you know, you have this practice, which is in San Jose, which is the heartbeat of Silicon Valley, one of them, and you counsel people who are really high achievers, right? And this concept of success versus happiness. Um, when you work with these high achieving individuals, I remember Marshall Goldsmith telling me on one of his last books, it was like nothing was ever enough for those people. It's always got to have more. You got to have, well, look, you have 40 million. Are you going to get to 50 million? You got 6 cars, a Ferrari, this and this, and you're going to have another one. Then you're going to get a bigger house. And when does it stop? When does enough? Why do you think traditional success matrices often fail to bring one happiness? There's a big difference between success and happiness.
Huge difference between success and happiness. I know some very successful people who are profoundly unhappy. And I love when Mel Robbins says, you know, when you die, you don't have a U-Haul that follows you with all of your stuff.
Yeah.
You just die. So we are chasing this fallacy. And I would even imagine that in many cases, they're buying into a belief that if I make this much, I'll be happy, and I won't be happy until I make this much, except for the fact that it's a moving target. And we know through hard research on happiness studies that material alone does not get us happiness. If it's mere material that we use for an experience, that will bring us joy, that will bring us joy. But experiences are the things that bring us joy in this life. And unless the person loves their work as they are making this mad money, if they feel like this is a purpose-driven thing and they just have to do it because they love it, well, then they're having an experience that is actually separate from the extrinsic result of making money. If they intrinsically love the work itself, then they're winning.
Mhm.
But if their relationships are suffering badly, then they too will suffer. We know that the biggest predictor of longevity is the quality of our relationships and love. The Harvard study, it's the Cambridge study,
Right.
where they basically, I know you're familiar with it, where they actually looked at 2 populations, both male Harvard graduates and relatively uneducated men from Southie Boston. They both lived longer when they had really good and meaningful relationships. And that seems to be the hard stop. Love is, in fact, the answer. The Beatles got it right, particularly when Paul was writing the lyrics. But so experiences and love, the car itself isn't going to bring us happiness unless we truly love driving that car and it never loses its scent. I was working with a guy whose dream car was a Ferrari. And he'd been driving it for 5 years and he'd habituated to it. He no longer got the same charge of driving that car. He actually has good relationships and his family is great and all that other stuff. But one of the things I asked him to do was each time he turned on the ignition of that car, to do it from the perspective of his high school self. Do it from the perspective of a 16-year-old who had always dreamt of turning on this car.
Having a Ferrari.
And he did it, and what we appreciate appreciates. That's one of my other favorite axioms. If we appreciate something and we consistently appreciate it, it appreciates. Now, I drive a non-fancy car. I drive a plug-in hybrid Hyundai Santa Fe. I freaking love this thing. It drives great, and I got better tires. Both of the houses around me have better cars in their driveway. If I engage in social comparison, it would diminish my experience of the car. But I make it a point every time I drive my car. It's almost like watching an Alfred Hitchcock movie, because at some point in a Hitchcock movie, Hitchcock makes a cameo. And when you're driving with me in this car, at some point, I'm going to say, doesn't this thing drive great? And are these tires amazing? And it become a family joke. But I really feel that way. So what I was doing with this guy who had this Ferrari and he'd just forgotten how awesome it was, man, drive it from the perspective of your 16-year-old self who always dreamt of having this car, and it becomes an experience, not just a possession.
And that's a great example you gave, especially the one where you told the guy to get in as a 16-year-old and feel what it was like to be in there, because then the excitement of actually having a car like that would have much more meaning than impact of somebody who gets in at 50 years old, who's made all this money and
That's
afford a
right.
car like that, right? So I get where you're going with that. Now, look, connection with nature and art, and I'm going to add in there animals. uh, how do connecting with the natural world and engaging with art influence our mental um, well-beings?
Mm. First of all, as you said earlier, the animals, they love us unconditionally. And I'm an
Yeah.
extrovert by nature. And one of the interesting byproducts, almost like you reading Architectural Digest, when I got my cat taught me how to be an introvert, taught me how to self-soothe, taught me how to enjoy quiet and being alone. A dog is not going to teach you how to enjoy quiet as much, although they can. They can kind of chill, and if it's a snuggling dog, they can do both. But dogs, for the most part, are like real exercises in extroversion. In fact, one of the great things that animals teach us is how to meet our neighbors. If you take your dog for a walk, people will engage you far more likely than if you were walking alone. There's hard research on that. It's not surprising to anyone. But one of the things I did when my dog Motzi died was I drew a list of all the people Motzi introduced me to who I would not have met had it not been for Motzi. And many of these people became my good friends. Um, Art, my gosh, I mean, there have been poets who've described that t art is kind of the closest we come to touching the hand of God. Um, we're meant to be creative, and it's one of the things that I love about Sir Kenneth Robinson's great TED Talk, where he talks about creativity and how important it is to help children do this. One of his big jokes was, this girl was drawing a picture of God in class, and her kindergarten teacher said, "Well, nobody knows what God looks like," and she said, "Well, they will know when I'm done drawing him." And I thought that was, I mean, we kids love art. They become self-conscious over time. They begin to worry about how their art will be regarded, and that's a tragedy. Almost like, to go back to some of the Bible stories, it's almost like eating from the tree of knowledge. Suddenly, like, oh my gosh, we become self-conscious and we suddenly start covering ourselves up. But we're meant to be creative. And when you're in creative flow, you lose track of time. You could be doing something for 5 hours and it only feels like 50 minutes have gone by. And flow is really good for our mental well-being. For you, I'm guessing podcasts, you've done over 1,000 episodes of these. I'm guessing you've spent most of them in flow.
I would like to think that. I'm not going to berate myself. What I'm going to say is, I think it depends on the topic. Now, I was and still am very much into what you and I are talking about. There are sometimes things that maybe aren't as exciting, and I'm being quite honest, and maybe I lose my flow, but I'm definitely staying in flow with Super Psyched, because I'm
That is
super
similar.
psyched to have you on. Now, um, I used to have a friend that used to use a term called "what fills your rice bowl." You say what's filling your cup, right? Um, how can someone assess the activities that are most replenishing? I think look, in connectivity, it's like, okay, do I go play basketball or do I ride my bike? Well, I know for me, you could say, well, riding a bike's kind of a loner, but that's what I do. But it is a connection for me with nature, right? So I see all of us have different activities in our life. Some of us may jog, some of us may go to the gym, we may do yoga, tai chi, it doesn't matter what it is. But these activities are actually activities that replenish our soul. They replenish our energy. It's like plugging us in and getting a reboot, right? So, how can someone assess which activities are best for them or not? And I think I might know the obvious one there. It's the one that recharges me. But, it's not a Tesla charger in the garage, right?
Sure. So I love what you said about cycling. I have experienced that firsthand. I went through a cycling phase in my life, and I hope to bring it back because it is so incredibly rejuvenating to me. Being out there in nature and just kind of being with the world. It's just wonderful.
Your hair in the wind.
My hair in the wind is the best. So I have actually come up with an acronym to help people figure out what will fill their rice bowl, or in my case, their cup. And usually these things take a little bit of activation energy. A lot of people think that, if I just binge watch something, this will be the most rejuvenating thing I can do. And I love binge watching. I'm not throwing shade that way. But usually the things that give us energy require some energy in return. I'm guessing that every time you've ridden the bike, when you get back in your car, you're thinking, oh my God, that was awesome. And I'm so glad I did it. But I came up with 4 letters and they spell out feed, F-E-E-D, even though I guess filling your cup is more of a drinking process, but feed. So all of these letters are based on hard research. The F stands for flow. Is it challenging? Do you lose yourself as you're immersed in it? Does time go by very quickly? Is it challenging in some good way? The first E after F stands for energize. Does it require energy from me? And does it give me energy back in return? The third letter is E, and it stands for educate. Do I become better at the thing? Do I become smarter? Do I move the needle in some meaningful way? And the fourth letter, D, depth. Is it meaningful? We are meaning-based creatures. Michael Meade said on my podcast, we're not just Homo sapiens, we are Homo symbolicus. We are meaning-based creatures. We do things because they're meaningful. And if it has all 4 of those elements, F-E-E-D, flow, energy, educate, and depth, we win.
Wow. Well, you know what, Adam, this book is awesome. And for my listeners, we are going to have a link to the website. It's Adam Dorsay, and the book is called Super Psyched, 4 Types of Connections and Live the Life That You Love. Unleash the power of those connections. You've really been generous with your time and sharing with our audience the kind of things. Is there any one thing that you'd like to leave the audience with, whether they're watching or they're listening to this at this point, that you believe is the key strand that kind of links everything together?
I would basically say, if you are following connections, think about someone in your life who you might have had a really good connection with, who you're not in touch with. Reinvigorate that. If there's an activity that you used to love doing, but you kind of let fall by the wayside, bring that back to life. The easiest ways for us to find either interpersonal or intrapsychic, meaning within ourselves, a sense of connection, is by reinvigorating something we loved, but let fall by the wayside. So I would consider that as one of my top tips.
I love it. Reinvigorating something we loved that maybe we disconnected with. Bring it back into your life. For all my listeners, again, we'll put a link to Adam's website in our blog. Go out to Amazon. We'll put a link on Amazon to go get the book. Please do that as well. And Adam, thanks for your time this afternoon. Really appreciate it. Namaste to you. Thanks so much for being on Inside Personal Growth, sharing your wisdom and your stories and your life experiences and all the people that you've counseled over the years to actually have this wealth of knowledge about these 4 types of connection that we all need to do. Go out and get the book. Thanks so much, Adam. I appreciate it.
Greg, it was a blast being with you, man.
Take care.
You too.
Thank you for listening to this podcast on Inside Personal Growth. We appreciate your support. And for more information about new podcasts, please go to InsidePersonalGrowth.com or any of your favorite channels to listen to our podcast. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.